You guys joining. Well, recording in progress. For those of y'all that I don't know, my name is Zach Hudson. I'm one of the program managers on the AGS side for CWX. And Kate and I have been working together for probably close to 2 years, and just being connected to the DE&I efforts, there was kind of a noticeable gap, and we wanted to spark conversation, continue to educate people. Personally, my mom works kind of in the blue collar industry and construction. My wife is in healthcare, and I've experienced both of them being marginalized at times, and don't love that, right? So I think I've learned a lot over the last couple of years, and just being educated from strong female and male leaders around me. And I thought it was important that to highlight and show that this isn't like equality, some of these gender biases, it's not just a female issue, right? It's a collective issue. And so it would be almost irresponsible for me to just pass the baton and say, hey, women on the call, fight for yourselves, band together, right? Like, this is a collective effort, and kind of we want to make sure that just because somebody doesn't look like you, talk like you, have the same experiences, that like as a leader, as a peer, as a follower, you know what signals are, you know what barriers are, so you can help kind of push things forward. And then really, I have a strong female leader. I have a lot of strong female peers that I look up to, that I would hate for them to have significant blockers that I'm not doing anything about. And then selfishly, I have 2 little girls at home that I will be damned if I don't eliminate every blocker that I can in order for them to be successful. So I'm excited to partner with you guys. I'm excited to just learn and to continue to be educated. And we want this to be kind of a safe place to have discussion, right? And to collectively acknowledge that there's gaps or issues that we can push forward through together. So thanks for letting me join and letting me be part of the panel, but I'm excited. I'll kick it back over to you, Kate.
Thank you, Zach. And y'all can tell why we love partnering with someone who is so strong in those ideals and shares a lot of our goals here. So as a strategic supplier to Meta, this partnership is one of our most important and valued at the Mom Project. So we both felt it was a great time at the start of the year to bring this topic up, and particularly the advancement of women within an organization, to a discussion along with some incredible data to back it up. So we're going to have this chat. We're going to hear from leaders within your org, as well as partnering with Adrian from Werklabs, who will introduce herself here shortly to tie it all together. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll make sure we get to them at the end. This is a collaborative, casual session, and we're really looking forward to your insights. So now for some faces you're probably familiar with. If each of you could introduce yourself quickly and let the group know your connection and your interest to the topic today. Megan, we'll start with you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Megan Norwood. I've been with AGS for 7.5 years, and part of my direction for this topic, and I loved what Zach said, that it's not just a one-sided issue. It's an issue that everyone deals with, and it's an issue that it's great to have a great discussion on it. And I think it's so important that we have that focus. And I think that when I became a leader at AGS, that's when I started getting more involved in these discussions, because I started hearing from people that I led that they don't see people that look like them. And that was a huge moment in my own career where I was like, oh, I want to make sure that people do get represented. And it doesn't matter what gender you are. I want people to see people that look like them in leaders, and so that they have something to strive to too. So I think that's what was my largest wake-up call for it, rather in parallel to my own experience too. So I'm excited for this discussion today.
Love that. Thank you, Megan. Margaret, how about you?
Awesome. Hey, everyone. Margaret Thurston here. I'm one of the program managers also on the CWX team with AGS. Very similar to Megan. I think even going a little step further there, obviously, like reaching on the topic of women is just like kind of touching the cusp of really ensuring, yes, we see people that look like us. But I also think that there's such an importance when we're talking about like diversity and thought, even just like somebody's background and experience, it goes a lot deeper and we have to make sure that that's like the room stays collectively different to make sure that we don't have one track mindset. And so I love this topic. I know there's obviously so much growth and continued efforts that can be made in this direction, but I'm really excited to kind of be at the starting point here.
Love that. Thanks so much, Margaret. And finally, Dana.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dana Stepek. I started with AGS November of 2021, and I'm currently a PS2 lead. This topic is so important because as Zach, Megan, and Margaret all touched on, this is an us issue. We need awareness, and it is important as a team. And as an organization, we learn together, grow together, and evolve together. I'm just like so excited for this.
Amazing. We're so happy to have you. And Adrian, please introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about Werklabs and your research on this topic.
Yeah, first I just want to say what a breath of fresh air it is to hear everyone talking about how passionately invested they are in the topic, because guess what? That's what shifts cultures, right? Because we collectively are the culture of AGS. So what we do decide, determine, and champion is what becomes our new reality. So yay! And like what I heard echoed from Zach all the way through is this idea that it's not just about the underrepresented group, right? It's about the whole collective. And what I always like to show and say when we look at the data is it's true in every way, which is that we all impact the outcomes, but we are also all impacted by it. And we're going to look at some data that reinforces that. But when we talk about any kind of underrepresented group getting kind of greater representation, there is a spillover effect to equity all the way around. And like Dana said, you know, this idea of having heterogeneous perspectives is also really innovative for the business, right? So it's beneficial to us individually, it's beneficial to us collectively, and it's beneficial to us organizationally. I'm jumping the gun because I haven't introduced myself, but I just, yay to everything everyone said. Okay, so I'm Adrian Young, I'm with the Werklabs team. So we're the independent research arm of the Mom Project. So we bring insights and thought leadership around future equitable workplaces. We track what we call weak signals on the radar. So often that just means things that are getting overlooked and maybe under reflected in data. We're headed up by Dr. Pam Cohen. She's a social scientist and her specialty is in predictive analytics. So the beauty of the research we bring is we're finding ways, the way in which it connects and tethers back to bottom line, right? Back to business. So as we talk to our leadership teams and stakeholders inside the organization, we're talking about things that are consequential to the business. So that just usually paves the way for investment to be really validated because it does matter. It has impact on the business outcomes. Anyhow, so in particular, gender parity is central because we are the Mom Project. So when we talk about women in leadership, that really is also talking about parental benefits as well and workplaces that have a culture of care. So that's me. I've been with the Mom Project for almost a year and I'm just delighted to be here and representing this.
Awesome. Thank you, Adrian. I'm so excited to dive in. So myself, having been in the staffing industry for over 10 years, I know firsthand what it's like to work for and work with organizations that prioritize this topic of gender parity, and also the stark difference in my experience when you're involved with those who don't. Having been in situations where I felt professionally stunted or unable to advance, I'm even more aware of the importance of advocacy of advancing women. But like everyone said, not only is this good for women, it's great for business. And I think it's important, again, that I reiterate the relevance of gender parity for all participants, not just females, but our male counterparts as well. All players contribute and benefit from advancing it. And the validation of women in leadership in particular is a huge factor in advancing DE&I goals, as Adrian mentioned earlier. So Adrian, I'd love for you to share some specific findings that help explain that point a little bit more.
Yeah, of course. All right, let me walk through the process that Werklabs use just so we understand kind of how we come to these determinations. So we use a really, really rigorous methodology. We begin with qualitative, and that always starts with doing one-on-one interviews. And for anyone that draws insights from research, it's so helpful, especially when we're talking about underrepresented populations, to know that what we're calibrating against comes from the voice of the group in particular that we want to target. So we're not, as a research team, the research team is not presupposing anything. They're having interviews directly one-on-one with the population that we're hoping to serve and finding out from their own narrative experience. What is it that influences your work experience, your ability to thrive, your ability to contribute? That then gets put into a survey instrument. So now we can have some quantitative measures that can get built into what I was calling before that predictive analytics. So a predictive model that says, and what's the consequence of that? So when we understand and I can identify these themes or these drivers that are super impactful, what's the consequence of being able to have a lever that moves those drivers in the direction it needs to? What's the consequence of that on the business, on the organization, on the culture, and then of course on the individual? So that's the process that we go through to kind of identify these. So it helps to really recognize there's rigorous objectivity when we're looking at this stuff. So these aren't, philosophical. These are really, really validated practices. Okay, so to Kate's point, then, so what are the data findings? And if we're talking about it impacts everybody and it's impacted by everybody, to what degree? When we look at gender parity, what we wanted to find out, what we want to look at is not just how do you get there, right? But what are the building blocks and what are the contributions that occur? So we have talked to and looked at predominantly, I want to note this, there's a little asterisk on your screen, you'll see that because we're TMP, these do skew heavily caregiver. So the reason why that's still applicable, and I just want to note that out of the gate, is because 86% of women will become mothers by the time they're 44. So when we talk about insights and intel that come from a caregiving population, that still will serve the interests of the business long-term, because as we're scaffolding an organizational culture that can support parents, caregivers, and moms, that's also paving the way for longevity and being able to retain employees across time. So I just want to note that before we dive in. Okay, so here are some of the outcomes that we see when we assess the impact of having women as colleagues and as leaders across the organization. So it affects a lot of different areas, a lot of different facets, but there's a few central themes that I wanted to hone in on, just as, again, motivation for us to kind of like dig in and do this work collectively. So the first is around the employee experience. What we see is higher rates of well-being, communication attribution, approachability, there's greater sense of empathy. All of these factors go up when we have greater representation of women, and in particular, when we have women as leaders or managers. Additionally, from a business standpoint, organizational performance goes up. We see higher rates of retention, productivity, and loyalty when we have women in leadership. And then lastly, equity inclusion. So we have a lift in the overall positive workplace experience, but we also have a greater sense of employee satisfaction around DE&I. When there's women in leadership, the comment that we hear from respondents is there's a greater focus on extending equity across the organization. So it's kind of like this rising tide mentality. When we have an underrepresented party get put in that position, there is a greater emphasis on making sure all boats rise. So that gets connected to, and now I'm going to talk about an additional study, but it's just a reinforcing, again, calibrator. We did a study specifically on DE&I and around what occurs when organization-wide the employees feel a greater sense of satisfaction around their DE&I efforts, around how intentional the organization's being, around how much emphasis they put on it, around how transparent leaders are, around making commitments to DE&I, around how that's being tracked and monitored across time, and how we're able to show progress. Like a lot of us just said at the beginning, how much reciprocity do we have in the conversation around these priorities? How much discussion do we see happening when maybe an ERG brings something forward? Do we see leaders kind of dive in and tackle that and then have a conversation around how we're making moves? When that occurs, we see huge lifts, and I don't know how well we can see these stats, but the level of recommendation around your organization. So consider that your talent pipeline goes up by 51% higher where that's done intentionally, meaningfully, and well. Retention, 57% higher. In a volatile job market, having an organization that retains people well is tremendously impacted by doing DE&I well. Productivity, so literally the output of our organization, 39% higher when we have high rates of DE&I satisfaction. And then I always say the holy grail, because there is no way to fabricate this, but a sense of belonging among the team. That's 31% higher when we see DE&I done well. So again, when we think about women leaders as influential to DE&I metrics. We look at it as one arm in a bigger equation around DEI, but as certainly an important one to consider. Again, so that's again how we look at and how we consider the role of women in leadership connected to DE&I. And so it raises all, oh, that's not a question, sorry. It raises all factors. So the question is then, what are the building blocks to get to this place where, and a lot of times the question comes up, how do we get more women to self-advocate and kind of strive to get in those positions? And the answer is that we start actually with creating a culture of care, right? We create this foundation of empathy where we all collectively kind of understand the needs, and then leadership down side to side, we really respect what those needs are. It's kind of, again, this framework or this scaffold for understanding how we can get to the place where employees feel comfortable self-advocating, articulating their needs, really championing for what they want, really striving for gains across leadership positions and things like that. So I just wanted to first establish that this is what it looks like. It looks like we stack and tier up to this kind of unlocked capacity to self-advocate and to have greater levels of peer support versus having maybe a competitive culture where we're all in this together and we're all working towards the same common goals. So this is, again, what the framework looks like, and we're going to kind of dive into this more specifically. But sessions like this are one of the building blocks, right? Having a really solid ERG team is one of the building blocks. Have leaders who want to hear from you and solicit your input is one of those building blocks. So these bottom levels, again, are what ladders up to this capacity to self-advocate. So I just wanted to establish that framework.
Thank you, Adrian. I think I really take away how important it is to have that ground level support organizationally. Like, you can feel that way personally, your peers might feel that way, but as far as getting to a point where you're able to advocate, it's really difficult to do that without that organizational support. So Megan, I'd like to kick it to you, noting the importance of this and how important it is to have that empathy and managerial support specifically as the basis for females in particular to be able to self-advocate. Can you share an example or a time when this has really rung true for you?
Yeah. And I think my thought first goes to a little bit more of the building blocks too, of what does it mean to self-advocate and also how to self-advocate. And I think that that's where you need to start, is having people learn how to speak up for themselves and know what that means. And I think that's something that was so beneficial for me, as having a leader that was able to teach me that and push me to learn how to evaluate myself and evaluate myself fairly. I think that's also key, is, you might see some failure points, you might see some things you succeed, but you're able to take pride in your perspective in order for others to fight for your perspective. And I think that it starts with your own opinion of what and how you see yourself. And I think that helped me so much. And it seems easy, but it is so hard to be so true to what you deserve and what you feel like you deserve, without all the comparisons and what we just talked about with the building blocks. Because until you can see it yourself, you can't really fight for it and have that backing. And so once I was able to get that, I was able to feel that value and push myself to self-advocate. And then I had leaders that helped me. So something that was great, and I think groundbreaking for me, was having a leader refer me for an ERG, like to lead an ERG for our company. And I think that was the point where I felt like being referenced in a way that was really important to my values, and that I was heard and seen. And also I saw my own purpose and I felt supported and empowered in that role. So I think it starts with that teaching. It starts with looking within as well, but also teaching others to be able to evaluate themselves fairly.
I love that, Megan. And I think something I hadn't really considered is, like, it's not an innate skill to know how to at least I was never taught that early on in my career. And I feel that's pretty standard across the board with a lot of my colleagues. Is like, we're learning this as we go. But when we have that support from a manager or someone that recognizes your interest or capability, to really push you forward. So I love that you've had that experience, and now you're leading an ERG and doing the same for others. So Margaret, can you share an example of how either a supportive manager or an organization that really gets it has had a measurable impact on your growth, either personally or professionally?
Yeah, I think it's funny to follow Megan's, because I think the sentiment is we probably all have so much community and having that same experience, where as much as we can feel confident in our own ability, and a lot of the times I really do, you're almost blinded at times to realize like what your ability is and what the next step might look like. And so I know people in this room have really helped get to know me and really understand and say, hey, why these strengths, certain things that are just maybe not technical or whatever these might not be, that I'm like, okay, well, what good is that? Somebody can help show me how that can build my path. Like they are validating, okay, you might be set up and be good for this type of skill set or this next role because of your skill set. And so something that I maybe never sought out for myself, somebody plants a seed and you start getting a little bit more, that validation is what's encouraging, right? Where it's like, okay, let me put myself out there despite not feeling like maybe I'm ready. And I think that it takes a lot of people around you sometimes to really pump you up, to feel like, yeah, I can do this. And to Megan's point, I know we all have to build that security internally, but I think when we know people also believe in us, that breaks down a lot of the barriers. And so I think definitely like within AGS as an organization, I've had leaders that help me do that and can cross a line where I'm like, okay, I feel like I'm moving pretty blindly. I don't really know what my goals or direction is. That's somebody that kind of steers me back in my lane by helping listen to me and see me. And so, yeah, that's really,
I just think it's so cool that you've had that shared experience and you both have that support. That's unique. And I love that you all can see that and speak to it. I think going back to the ERG point, Megan, one of the ways Adrian shared, organizations can foster a culture of empathy is having a really strong ERG presence. I know as a leader, you're very involved, and AGS has always had, strong ERGs. I'd love for you to talk about the way that it's been really beneficial for the team to have a supportive environment, and for leadership to have a pulse on the employee perspective, and any specific examples that come to light or that you think about in the framework of an ERG.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and I know we have Dana here too, and I think she's going to talk more about the perspective of she's been in the ERG for a lot longer than me, and I want to give her that platform to talk, but I also want to talk from that leadership of building the charter for this year. And I think that it was interesting because I am a newer member for this ERG, and I think at the beginning of the month, we started building the charter, and the key words that stuck out to me were, we had empower, inspire, belong, mindfulness, and it was all just really things that are really impactful words to feel fulfilled in a job. And I thought they were it seems like such basic items, but are so important that I feel like we don't do enough in our day-to-day. And I loved the focus and dedication from the leadership perspective that we can create tools to be involved as a company, but also bring that to our teams. And that's something that Dana, I know, has done she's done a lot of work on that. And then I know that we're leaving opportunities for a lot of our hub offices to get more involved in that. And seeing the work that this ERG has planned for just this year, it's really enlightening, because this is only one of about 12 that AGS offers. And I think I know that I've had my own world enlightened from it, because there's certain things that you just don't learn unless you put that time to dedicate yourself to it. And I think that there are just so many impactful things that I'm happy AGS offers from that leadership level, and that I can now take and be mindful of moving forward. So
Yeah, that's great. And I just love, I love that there's kind of a way for everyone to get involved from like a leadership perspective. You have a choice. There's a lot of options. And Dana, I'd love to hear your perspective as an ERG member and leader in that org. Can you share an example of how being a part of that with other like-minded people has had a measurable impact on you professionally? I'd love to kind of hear, because I know you've been involved for a long time.
Absolutely. So I just kind of wanted to start off by saying it's really, really easy to stay small. And I think us breaking away from the boxes that we've been put in and kind of pushing through and having the support of leadership, female and male, to take the time to really know us and know what we're about and what we're capable of to kind of push us through in these different fields and opportunities. You know, a great leader once told me, you are not bad at things or have bad qualities. It's just strengths you haven't built on yet. I was approached to go into the Elevate ERG by Ani, and I didn't know what to expect. I'm going into this. I met, you know, the leadership. I'm sitting there, amazing experience, just very intimate. And then going into that first TED Talk, and then going into the MVETS event, it was, I mean, I just get the chills thinking about it. I'm like sitting there and I'm like, I had no idea that this is something that I needed. You're sitting there with 100+ powerful women and men from all levels of leadership that are there supporting each other, asking questions, seeing how they can help, seeing how they can be a part of it, and really giving that massive sense of community that I feel like gets lost in a lot of organizations. Elevate had just really opened my eyes to a lot of things that I didn't know that I needed within my workplace and outside of it.
I love that. And I think it goes to show and double down on how important that community is. And sometimes not knowing that other people in your position or like positions or leadership positions are thinking the same things, feeling the same things as you are, and have not expressed it. Having an ERG as a mechanism to get that out there and start those conversations and have some support are just so important. So I'm thrilled that you all have that experience. Adrian, I'd love to understand how we start to frame this and put this into practice. I'm really interested in some of the practical and pragmatic drivers women in the workplace need to thrive at an organization, just as a baseline.
Yeah, definitely. I do want to just say, based on the sentiment shared, that it just kind of make sense. Right now we get the logic flow. If I feel like I'm seen and these are things that I didn't know I needed and my group's invested in me, and I'm an organization that creates these, you know, communities where I feel represented well, that makes sense, right? That I really feel like the foundation of care is there. If we look at this, it's the most high impact action to create an inclusive, productive workplace for women is having real evidence, real truth, real proof in the fact that my organization cares about me as a human beyond just my functional role. And what you all described there is exactly that sentiment. That also then lends to the idea that at some point, in addition to being a supportive mechanism for employees, ERGs are also a really valid intelligence source for leadership teams and stakeholders, right? So as teammates recognize, oh, this thing that I thought was independently my experience, and now I've welcomed this community of intel that shows me it's our experience, becomes a data point that then you can help ladder up and say, here are some of the things, which is our next step, that are about work structures. So what are the practical and tactical things that we as teams recognize that we need functionally within our organization? So that's what we're going to look at next. Okay, so these are the identified building blocks or central drivers that we see recurring in many, many, many studies around what women need in workplace, again, functionally. The first is flexibility, right? So this has been an ongoing conversation. It's paramount and important that it's not just about having flexibility like logistically, but it's also around, same thing, having a culture that respects the need for flexibility. This comes and shows up a lot for parents when it comes to scheduling, right? So if I need to have a sick day appointment, I presently at this moment having a snow day, the school closed. So I need to be able to step away from time to time, or pickups. That's how it would look for parents. But with neurodivergent team members needing to be able to have the capacity occasionally to work from home, with people that had medical attention that they need to go out and do, it's for anything where you need to have some sense of agency or autonomy over your schedule, time, or place of work. And you have a manager, a leader in an organization that respects that trusts that you're doing your work and contributing how you need to. So that is kind of a central core driver for having an environment in which women will retain and thrive and be able to grow into leadership positions. The second is around career development. So are there fair, equitable, clear tracks for how we all progress inside this organization? Are the evaluation tools the same? Do we all have equal access to what those tracks are? Is it like conversations on the side and happy hours that end up getting you lined up from promotions? Or is it, again, clear cut and equitably distributed? So that one becomes central. And again, are there learning and skills opportunities for everybody? Do we have ways that you have all identified from the ERGs you're participating in that managers and conversations led to where you were going to go next, because they were invested enough in you to kind of champion what that trail would look like? So that's the exact example of what this driver is interpreted as. The next is DEI. So we talked at the origin around how influential DEI is. This is so key for many underrepresented groups, but for women in particular. And you kind of all echoed that sentiment. Do I see a place for me within the board, within the executive team, where I'm mirrored? Is this something that's integral to the culture? Do we track this? Is it transparent how we prioritize underrepresented groups? And are we all kind of conscious of where we're trending across time? When we talk about our DEI studies, sometimes what comes up is people are like, well, how do we implement it? But it is not a cut and dry thing where we're done, right? DE&I is an emphasis that happens longitudinally. So over time, you just keep seeing how we're trending and how we're making progress. And conversations and lunch and learns just like this are one of those ways. How do we continually bring up the conversation? How do we get really clear and honest about how we're trending? And then how do we make concessions and choices and interventions together? And how do we watch how those play out? And then the last is benefits and compensation. So is it perceived that that is also fair and equitable? Is there transparency around pay tracks? Is it known where we're at? Are the benefit packages similar? Do we have the benefits that we need to monitor the lifestyles that we all have? So when we look at that pyramid and we get that baseline down and we have this foundation that says, I have the capacity to thrive now because I feel trusted and respected, then we move to the mechanics. And these drivers represent kind of those mechanics of how we now can operationally exist in a way that gets to that top tier, which is self-advocacy. That's the rundown of the 4 drivers, Kate.
That's it. I think that's great. And I love that we have a baseline and it's consistent across every organization that I've ever been a part of. It's conversations that we're all having with our clients when we're looking to onboard clients. What are their priorities? Where are their investments? And we want them to be at a place that are in a positive direction. So I'd love Dana to get a little AGS specific. I'd love to start with you from the 4 drivers Adrian laid out from the research. I'd love to know what AGS does really well.
You know, I have a couple here. For me specifically, and obviously that will change, person to person, but career development. We have a pretty standard outline from leadership to map our futures and asking us, what do you want to do when you're ready to make that next move? I think there's so much power on its own to be asked point blank, tell me, how I can get you to your dreams and goals. And essentially, just to echo the common topic is, we have to self-advocate. They're asking us, like, let's give them those answers. Let's let them help us get there. Not only that, but we have so many different resources available to us within AGS, like Cornerstone and Degree Learning and seminars, and just exposure to higher leadership and stakeholders daily. We're very, very lucky in that nature to be able to have that on our day-to-day. And we're given opportunities within our teams and outside of our teams. And if we went to leadership and we wanted mentorships, outside of our accounts to reach goals and have more exposure to different accounts and different work, as well as different opportunities. Leadership is more than willing and able to do that. Both female and male doing exactly as their title says, leading us to more opportunity, encouraging us further. They really do encourage us to be hungry to push for next steps. And I've seen that all the way from the top down. And not only that, but of course, circling back to our ERGs, there's just such a strength there within every single ERG. I can personally speak for my own, but knowing that there's so many others out there and then that's available to us, that stimulate community and togetherness on topics and in areas that are so important, especially in current state. And that stems from the top, as seen in my ERG specifically, and participating in events throughout the year, which has been amazing to see, the highest forms of leadership just fully engaged and fully supportive. So that would be mine.
I think that's great. And also to commend AGS on having these types of opportunities. I think I've learned so much about what you all offer as an organization that, I talk to someone at AGS every day, a couple times a day, and I've learned a lot about what is on offer. And so even a lunch and learn like this, there might be people within your organization that weren't even aware of some of the opportunities and some of the education and some of the things that they can get involved in. So I love this as a mechanism for a catalyst for how people can get more involved. Zach, I think over our kind of relationship and as we've gotten to know, what we're both passionate about within our organization, you have been really explicit that AGS is a people first organization and they do a lot of things really well. And we've heard some of that from Dana. I also love to hear from you. Where is an area that you would love to see some focus on improving, or some areas of opportunity based on some of the things that we know drive impact and drive that progression of women that we're all really dedicated to? Where's a good focus area that you'd love to see some improvement on?
Yeah, so I think first, probably the area I've seen the biggest improvement on is the flexibility piece. And it doesn't matter, like everybody's at a different stage life-wise, right? And for me, at the time I needed it, right? When you don't have kids, when this was my life, right? I'm trying to move up, I'm trying to do things, and then priorities shift. And like I had 3 kids under the age of 5. And if you've never been at the point where you are not excelling at something, right? Like, especially if you're a new mom or a new father, like there will be a point where you're like, man, I'm not good at my job. I'm not good as a partner to my spouse. I don't think I'm that great of a parent. So you feel like you're failing in multiple areas, and you come through this decision tree of like, hey, one of these has got to go, right? And usually it's work gets deprioritized, which it should when you have a family to take care of. And I got to a point where I was like, I can't be successful at this. And luckily I was around a lot of pretty progressive leaders that also had children, were kind of this anomaly within the organization where it was primarily women. I think there was 37 people and there was only 3 guys. And they pulled me aside and they're like, hey, this is normal, right? Everybody goes through this. Here's kind of the pathways forward. And just because your schedule's changed, right? You're doing pickups and drop-offs and doctor's appointments, like you can still be flexible around the work-life balance piece and operate in all of those buckets without letting one drop. And maybe that looks like coming in later, having a flex schedule. There's times I'm on late at night. It's not because I'm working from 6 a.m. to midnight, right? It's maybe there's pockets where I'm doing practice or something else. So that was huge in terms of my career of like, I was ready to walk away from working in general, right? I was like, I'll be a stay-at-home dad. My wife makes more money than I do anyway, right? I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna stay at home. And I had people around me that just let me know that it is possible to be successful. It just looks a little bit different. And they were prioritizing that, and they were seeing the signals and kind of pulling me along with them. I think where there's an opportunity is still within the DE&I space. I think it's easy to agree that something's wrong, right? Or something's broken, or that something is the right thing to do. But I think integrating it into our day-to-day we do a good job of looking holistically and saying, hey, there's a gap here. But I think as we build out new processes, taking that into account, right, as we build in new things to make sure we're not intentionally leaving anybody out. And I guess to give an example around that, this is the first time I've run into it, but I don't think Polly's on this call, but Polly, female on my team that also observes Ramadan and fasting, and that can be a really difficult time for 40 days when you're trying to balance everything that's going on. And that's a major religion, right? She's not the only person that observes Ramadan or does fasting, and we were able to kind of lean on some other folks that have figured it out and to kind of work a flex schedule for the interim. And so I think just the idea of like broadening your train of thought into not just what's good for you, but what's good for the collective group of people when building things into processes, I think is an area that we're going to continue to get better at. But I would say that's probably the focus. And then I didn't want to be too long-winded, but I'm going to do it anyway. And then benefits and compensation. There's a lot of benefits that I didn't know existed, right? I traveled with quite a few working moms, and I don't know what it's called. It's called Stork something. It's not Stork Vision. It seems like a superhero thing. But it's for working moms that like they have to pump, right? And then you're not just going to dump that milk. They pack it up, send it back to their house. So there's a lot of really cool things and a lot of benefits that I don't know that we put out there as much, but that may be an opportunity just to let people know that those things exist. So
I think that's great. And Zach, there's some comfort in that validation from peers who have either been through it before you or are experiencing it at the same time. And sometimes it's just a matter of bringing it to your attention. I remember, and this is years ago now, with me and you being on calls, prior to the Mom Project, I worked at a company where I was always on camera, and I was home with a 1-year-old during COVID. And the panic I would feel when he would make a noise or enter the screen and need something because he's 1, and I was still working and I was still productive, but it was panic. And I remember on one of our first calls, some of your kids joined, and I was like, what a relief that we are partnering with people that are, they're in it with me and we're in it together. And it was clearly not a judgment. And I think that goes across the organization. I've been on calls with a lot of our partners who are just a lot more willing to be practical. This is the stage that a lot of us are in, observing that and not minimizing your contribution because you've chosen to be a parent or whatever the flexibility that you might need. I think it's really impactful. And it's cool that you had people that were reminding you that you can do both. So
Kate, can I interject for a second? Sorry to
yeah.
jump. I just want to say thank you, Zach, for illustrating the point in dual ways around your own AGS experience and then around your personal experience when you became a parent, because that's exactly what we're talking about here, right? So the accommodation for either Ramadan or for you to have some flexibility in becoming a parent was only applicable and impactful because you worked within the context of a compassionate org team that cared, right? Those leaders coming to you and say, hey, we understand, we got you, this will pass. You being able to be that supportive arm for your colleague that's inside AGS. Both of those things were fundamental to then caring about the intervention we could do structurally, right? So what can we do here? And things you're mentioning, that unlocks, again, that ability to ask for those needs because you knew that a manager was going to be open to that and care about it. And that you as a human being mattered and again was respected. So that again just illustrated the point in 2 very different ways. And then the only other thing I wanted to say is as it relates to women in particular is the reason why this becomes fundamentally so important is because we see a distinction when it comes to women as it relates to these building blocks versus men. Men really can draw on just a manager that green lights things, right? And says like, hey, we can give permission and authorization to do this. You can kind of ask me and we'll green light that and that'll be okay. Women need it at the organization level. They need to be able to look around and see that the cultural cues are present, that it's okay, that it's permissible. And then they'll go to their manager and get that affirmation that we can work out an agreement or come up with an arrangement. So I just wanted to note that distinction, but thank you for giving wonderful illustrative examples.
Also,
Love it.
Kate, I don't know if I'm gonna
Yeah.
lie so far off script, but this is just one added perspective here too, because I know we talk about so much from a community perspective of parents and things like that. And I just think one thing I want to give a little nod to AGS for is obviously there's a lot of us that don't have families or don't have kids or whatever that is. And we do still receive that same level of support of, okay, pursuing whatever our passions or dreams or things outside of that. Like, it's not maybe picking up a kid from school, but it's like, hey, this is really important to me. And there's still a lot of value and care that's put into me as an individual, both, and I think there's something to be said, right? I don't get, well, sorry, you don't
Totally.
have a family, so you can't do this. It's very equal arms. So I wanted to just
No, I
give
think
credit where it's
it's a
due.
great perspective, and it's not off topic because it goes to, elevating everyone within the organization, no matter your personal choices, no matter your professional kind of standing, giving you room to be your best self and show up at work, and also have time to do your passion projects, whether they be within in an ERG at work or outside of your professional capacity. That example, I think, is perfect and is really aligned with that flexibility and everything we've talked about as research validated priorities for an organization to have. I know we are getting a little close to time, and I want to allow some time for questions if we have any, but I'd love to just, in closing, Megan or anyone on the AGS team, following this discussion, now that we are armed with a little bit more research, do you see your individual role in the bigger picture of gender parity differently, or are you validated in your feelings? And what challenges do you imagine might still persist in getting others to self-advocate?
Yeah, I think this has all been a very validating experience, but also I've really loved hearing Zach's perspective of how he has the same challenges that we have and it's not just, and I loved Margaret's sentiment too. I think that we have a very young team that is not all just moms or parents. And there's so many things that came in my head of, oh wait, I have an example of that. Or I have an example of where, AGS actually did stick up, where I did have a leadership that had my backing when like being tagged for something just because I don't have kids. That's me being singled out without assuming I have other priorities that I need to go to, but also you can't vice versa, just assume that someone with kids isn't going to want an opportunity because they're too bogged down. So I think all I'm hearing is it's been really enlightening, but also like the spirit of just transparency and being vulnerable and being able to advocate for yourself starts with believing in the things that you're doing, but also being honest about shortcomings, being honest about and prideful of the things that you love and you've achieved, and the things that being able to talk to them about your goals for yourself, because then other people can advocate for you. So it's about being transparent when it comes to what we offer, but also having that trust built with your leaders, with the people you lead, like anybody in the organization. If you have that trust and that transparency, it goes a long ways. I can see us still having transparency with the motivating people to just feel empowered to show up day to day. I think that that's such a hard thing to do because you get so bogged down with all the other priorities that you have. So I think that that's still in my mind is a challenge that we have to become more transparent with the things that are available for people. And there are things I've never heard of within our organization that we offer, which we just need to get it out to the people that need to hear it. Like even just the milk stork thing, that is cool. That's awesome. And I think that hearing ways that you can become a mom and it is achievable, I think for me personally makes me think it is less pressure to make the decision for my family later on. There's so many thoughts that go in my mind of it's not attainable, it's not achievable, and my career is going to suffer. And I think that that's something that we have to be transparent about what is available and that you can still succeed.
I love that perspective. And so much of it today for me has been about education and some like-mindedness that is clearly here in this organization and with our partners. And it's so important to continue to have that conversation. I think it's difficult sometimes to be vulnerable and say, I'm really worried about this, or I don't really feel comfortable speaking up about this. But we've got leadership on this call who have just said, we've been through it. I was supported. Here are the resources I had available to me. And there's clearly a lot available, whether it be a conversation or actual attainable resources, ERGs that are really strong within the organization. So I think there's just so much good here. Dana, I see you've raised a hand.
I just wanted to really quick just also take a minute and kind of echo Megan as well. I just wanted to say to Zach specifically how much I truly appreciate you as a man coming, you know, to all of us women and being like, hey, can you partner with me on this? I want to learn. Like, I want the knowledge behind it. I want you to be there with me for it. But I want to be here to learn. And I'm not going to pretend that I know what the struggle is or anything like that. I simply just want the information. Like, it made me pause. It made me just kind of sit back and be like, wow. So thank you, Zach, so much. And thank you to all of you as well for putting this together.
Thanks for being willing. I just tapped in the people that were smarter than me to come help me out. But I think if there's anything I've learned in the last couple of years, it's just that there's not always one way to do something, and there's barriers that exist that you can sometimes be blind to, right? And I learned them every day. Megan and I were talking about catching flights the other day, and the safety concern of flying in before everybody else is something that I don't think about. So I'm continuing to be educated, but if nothing else, I hope that people can leave with like that there is another opinion, there is another thought process. There are sometimes different sets of rules that you're not aware of, that you have to kind of open your eyes up to if you're going to help pull people through it collectively.
For sure. I'm so appreciative of this panel and the willingness for you all to dive in and be vulnerable on a topic that I know we all feel is important, but sometimes it's kind of hard to talk about. Having worked with this group a long time, there are just no better partners and advocates for change. And I'm excited to see how AGS continues to progress and how we continue to drive impact together. I don't think I saw any questions. Adrian, if I'm not sure you did either, but we have a little bit of time to continue the conversation. Any final thoughts from any of the panelists or Adrian about where we can continue to learn from some of these insights you've provided would be great.
I'll just take the cue from Zach again, which thank you. It seems like we just coordinated this, but what you just in that closing thought is exactly what I wanted to make sure we echo and close with, which is it is the idea of being empathy only comes from an understanding of each other, right? And that comes from being able to share, and that what we are sharing is respected and valued. So Zach, you're exemplifying that in saying, what is it that we need to help this thing advance? And how can you share that with me so that I can help advocate for it with you? That's the whole thing, right? Whether it's about ethnic diversity, again, neurodivergence, ageism, women in leadership, whatever it is, it's understanding clearly the needs of one another and then advocating for it collectively. And I started with this and I'll end with this. I've done culture change for years and years and years. And it's just important to remember that sometimes we sit inside the culture as an individual and think, ooh, I wish this thing would improve or get better. And when we recognize, again, it's all of us collectively that make the culture what it is, then we look at our individual role differently. And that, again, is where ERGs can be great catalyzers, because it's a force of unity. We together want to advocate for this underrepresented group, this underrepresented thing, this need that we have, this opportunity. So we together move towards that. And if that can have, again, extending circles where it's collectively all of us moving towards those things, then the pace of change and advance just expedites. It just goes faster. So in the spirit of employee voices being heard, what questions do we have out there? What things do we want to make sure are captured in this recorded log that will be savored for a long time? And you can type them in if you don't want to vocally share, but is there anything that we want to cover in closing? Or any panelists that want to share a closing thought, excuse me. Oh, and there's a cutie on. Hi, cutie.
She's always available for calls.
I think I can just close it out just from a time, from a timing wise, Adrian, just to say, this has been such a cool way to kick off the year with, with our best partner at the Mom Project. And I think that I would love to continue to expand on this conversation and continue to grow. I'd love to check in and kind of see where conversations like this were maybe a catalyst for change and a positive change, and be able to continue to see these careers grow, new voices on the call, and we can really build on these lunch and learns and continue to just drive that impact together. So thank you all for your participation. And we had a great turnout for the majority of the call, and I'm just thrilled to have you all a part of it. So thanks for joining, and happy Tuesday, y'all.
Thank you for coordinating.
Thanks so much,
Thanks
everybody.
so much.
Appreciate it.
See y'all.
Bye, y'all.